Hi, Andreas from Toddle here. Throughout this course, we've been using formulas to build dynamic websites and interactive applications in Toddle. But formulas are one of the most complex and powerful concepts in Toddle, so I thought today might make sense to really do a deep dive and understand how they work and what you can actually do with them. If you haven't watched the previous videos in this series, I recommend starting there. Today's going to be a masterclass on formulas, and it really helps if you try them a little bit before. Also, make sure you stick with it to the end because I'll be giving you 2 bonus tips on how to really supercharge your workflow with formulas. Without any further delay, let's get started. Almost everything in Toddle can be defined using a formula, from attributes, showing and hiding, repeating elements, and even text content. So whenever you see this little FX button, it indicates that this is something can be defined dynamically. Let's open up the formula editor and have a look around. Here in the middle of the screen, we see our current formula with the rightmost node showing the output of that formula. We also have the option of closing the dialog, expanding to full screen, or clearing out the formula entirely. There are many different kinds of formulas, but one thing they all have in common is that they take a number of inputs and always produce a single output. Let me show you what I mean. So we can change the current formula by clicking the little button here in the top left part of the node, and then we open our formula select menu. In here, we can see everything that's available to us in the formula editor. First, we see some data structures, followed by some logic. I will cover both of those later in this video. Then we have some static values that usually come in quite handy. And finally, we can see all the list of formulas available to us in Toddle. So for here, we could search for capitalize, and this formula takes an input string and then return the output string with the first letter in capital. So in this case, we could change this to the input to Andreas, and we get as an output Andreas capitalized. And we can see here the formula takes, in this case, exactly 1 input and produces 1 output. You can either define the input here as a single value in this input here, or you can combine multiple formulas together to form more complex flows. So by clicking this little plus button, I can add a second formula to this flow to build more complex logic. Let's take capitalize here. No, that was capitalize. Concatenate here and add first a space. Nope. There we go, space, as well as my surname. We'll do that like this. And here we can see it takes that string and returns the capitalized version of it. First concatenates each part together into Andreas Müller, and then finally produces the capitalized output. So concatenate is a different kind of formula. It still works on strings, but this takes multiple input, and it's actually what we call a variable input formula. And what that means is you can choose how many inputs to give it. In this case, they're all strings, but it always still produces 1 output. Depending on the specific formula, it might have 0 inputs, 1 or more. Now, because formulas are composable in this way, when we use the term formula, we both mean a single node inside a formula, as well as a full flow of multiple nodes put together. Because for both of those cases, it's true that they take 0 or more inputs and produce a single output. And that is the definition of a formula. Now, just like we were able to add additional nodes to the start of our formula as input to the following nodes, we can also add nodes at the end, again using this plus button, or really any place in between. So let's say here we might want to add a trim formula, which trims white space off the start and end of the string. And this can be very useful, especially when handling user input like email and username, and you don't want any sort of trailing or following whilst like leading or trailing white space going into your backend. Now, in this video up until now, we've been dealing with static values in our formulas, but formulas only really make sense when working with dynamic data. So let's have a look at what kind of data are available inside our formula editor. Now, when I look in my formula select menu, I don't see any data available here. Let's go try and add a variable to this component and see what happens. We're going to call it message, and we're going to start with just hello. So now when I open my formula select, right there at the top, I'm going to see my new variable message. And I can pick that to start from and still add formulas to the end of it. So here I had to capitalize to make sure that my message is capitalized and well formatted. The same thing works for attributes and APIs. So every formula inside your component has access to all your variables, all your APIs, and all your attributes. In addition to the data available to all formulas inside a component, some formulas have access to special data because of the context they're executed in. Let me show you what I mean. So in this case, we have a list item here in the header, and this item has been repeated over a list. And inside this, any formula inside this item is going to have access to a special list item that represents the current item that we're repeating over. Similarly, when we're part of an event handler, so here, if we take this button's click event, any sort of formula defined inside of this workflow will also have access to the event that was fired when this button was clicked. And this can have useful information such as the mouse position, what button was clicked, etc. When we work with data in Toddle, it's important to understand that there are different types of data. Toddle has a few simple data types, such as Booleans, which is values that can either be true or false, numbers, of course, and text strings. We also have some more complex data structures, which are objects and arrays. An object is a data structure that allows us to store multiple pieces of information in the same place. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to create a new variable called user, and I'm going to define this using a formula, and I'm going to choose object. And in here, I'm going to create a new key, first name, and set it to Andreas, and another key, last name, and set it to Müller, my surname. So now I have a single value inside my variable, but it contains multiple values, in this case, both my first name and my last name. And I can then go and choose here my heading inside my formula. And maybe instead of message, I actually want to use my user variable instead. Now, of course, just picking the object doesn't make sense when we add capitalize at the end of it, because you can only capitalize strings. But here I can pick out the first name from my user object and use that instead. With objects, each item stored in the object is assigned a specific name called a key. Arrays are similar, but instead of using a name as a key, they use the position inside the array. Let's go and change our user variable and call it users. And instead of assigning it as an object, we're going to choose an array instead. And you can see by default, it has the same properties, but now instead of having a first name and a last name, it just has a 0 and a 1. In arrays, the first item is always called item number 0, and this is common throughout programming. Arrays can hold multiple kinds of values, including other arrays or objects. So let's instead go and add an object here, and we'll call this first name. And let's maybe go and add the second object of we'll add my co-founder here, last name. So you can see how data structures in Toddle can be combined in multiple different ways. You can have arrays inside objects. You can have objects inside arrays. Now, this allows us to do some interesting things. So now that we have our user list, we can add, for example, here to our main section, we could add a list. And we could choose, I'm just going to move myself over here. We can choose to have this these list item here. We could choose to have it repeat. We're going back. Based on the items in our users list. So we have 2 users in our list. When we repeat that over our list, our user array, we're going to see 2 items. And then maybe in here, what we actually want to do is we want to show the full name of our users. So we're going to use concatenate, start out by getting our item. As we remember from before, now we have access to our list item because we're repeating. And that item is going to be for the first list. It's going to be our first user, meaning me. And then we'll add a space. And we'll get the last name. And it looks like I am missing something, maybe misdefined something in my users. Yes, I have a lowercase n here. Let's go and fix that. There we go. So you can see for the first list item, it picked the first item in the list, my user, and for the second, my co-founder Casper's user. And just like with objects, we can access data inside of arrays here by picking the item, the element. Of course, we don't want, that doesn't make any sense here. So we can do almost all the same operations on lists that we can, or arrays as we can on objects. The difference is usually objects are really good for storing semantic information about a certain thing. So in this case, a user. Arrays are really good for storing list information. Like this project has a list of users, and each of those users will probably be an object having all the different kinds of information that are relevant for that object. Understanding how to use data structures is a core part of learning to program, whether you're using code or no code. And almost all of the data you interact with on a daily basis is going to be inside some sort of data structure. When you call an API, the response coming back is going to be in JSON, which Toddle automatically translates to either an object or an array. Toddle contains a lot of useful formulas for working with data structures, and especially for working with arrays. So here I've added a few more people to our users variable, and I want to be able to search through them. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a input field here. Just going to change the width of that. 100%. And then I want to add a variable search. I'm going to start that out with an empty string. And I can bind this variable to my input field using this bind to variable function on the right. And there we go. And what that means is that whenever I type into the input field, that variable is going to be updated at the same time. And if I, by some other way, reset or change the value in the variable, the value in the input field is also going to be changed. And so I want to filter through this list. So based on what I'm searching. So right now we can see that if I type in here, I change the variable value of search, but of course my list doesn't change because I haven't told it to do anything with that variable yet. And I could, of course, every time I type, go and update my users variable, but that kind of means when I then delete, if I filter any of them out, they would be gone, and I wouldn't want that because I need to sort of put them back when I'm done, when I clear my input field, right? So instead, I'm going to just go and select this list item, and I'm going to change the formula for repeat. So instead of just being all the users, I can add a formula here called filter. And the way filter works is that it takes an array of items, and then the second one it takes is a formula. So it takes like a whole sub formula, and in this, it gets access to each item in the array. So this little formula is then going to be applied to every item in the array. And if the value that comes out of this is true, then, or truthy, that means any value that's not false or null, then that item gets kept in the list. So we can see right now we have all of them. But if I go and say, for example, say I want to get first name and then includes, which is a formula that says, is this second value inside the first value? And here I can say my search. And I want to change this. So right now, this you can see this reduced the output over here to one element, which is Mandy. And that's because this is capitalized. So if we just change this to lowercase, we're going to have two elements, both Andreas and Mandy. Does match this? Does it include and, right? And so this way, whenever, as I'm typing, this list is dynamically updated. So I can say A is actually almost all of them. I've got, depending on what I type, you can see we get a different list of whether that letter's inside their first name. And as I clear it, I get all the way back because I never actually changed the variable. I never did anything to the original list. Another thing we can do with list operations is we could decide that we want to sort the results. So after we filter here, we could add another node called sort by, if I can spell. And the way this works is that you return either, you could either just sort by first name and then have an alphabetic ordering of anything coming back. And this actually works off the top. So you can see it reordered Craig up as number 2 here, because whether or not you're filtering any, you're still sorting at the end. We could also sort by index of, and then grab this. So we're taking the first name, and then we say, what's the index of the search string? So how early in that name are we actually seeing our search string, right? So now that we'd search, when I say AN, I'm getting Andreas before Mandy. Let's see if there's good. Where, for example, if I type R, we got 3 hits, but since Craig is position number 2, that comes up earlier. And that usually when doing search result, that can be a nice way of ordering because it's the most likely sort of top result. Now, there are many more array formulas, what I've shown here today. And using the formula select menu can be a really good way of sort of browse what's available. In addition to data structures and formulas, toddle also contains a list of logical operations. Let's have a look at how we can use one of those to refine our search example. So let's open up our repeat formula for this list item. And since this formula is getting rather big, I'm going to go into full screen. And I'm also going to zoom a bit out. And I can do that by holding the command key and just using the scroll wheel. I can also hold down space to drag my canvas around to sort of better get an overview of where I am. And this can be really helpful as you start to getting into some larger formulas. And so what we have here is that this sub formula here that we use for our filtering that says if the item's first name, when converted to lowercase, includes the search string, then we'll leave it in the list, otherwise get rid of it. We want to add here that it should actually also be the last name. That should also be accepted. So we can go and add the end here, add an OR operation, and then here add the same one again, when converted to lowercase, includes our search. So now it reads if the first name includes search or the last name includes search, then leave it in the list. And now maybe our index search doesn't quite work as well here. So maybe in this case, what we might do is just get rid of this and just simply have it order alphabetically by first name. Now let's go and try this. And if I now search for M, I'm actually getting myself as a top hit here because, again, M is part of my surname. And now that we start searching for Smith, for example, that is included in the surname. By using the logical operator OR in our formula, we could match item either when the first name matches the search string or the surname did. We have a similar operator AND, which is essentially the opposite. So it will only be true if all of its conditions are true. So in this example, if we were to switch our OR to an AND, we would only be matching users where both the first name and the surname was matching the search criteria. So I promised you that if you stuck with me to the end, I would share some bonus tip. And the first bonus tip is that you can use cut, copy, and paste inside of Toddle to move bits of your formula around. So here we can, for example, cut this one out. Let's say we were back at adding the and extension here to our formula. Instead of redoing this whole part of it, I can just select this, press Command C, and then here press Command V, and it inserts that whole subtree as well. And all I would have to do here was change this to last name. So this can really drastically help you improve your workflow, because very often you'll end up reusing sort of large chunks of a tree, but only making small adjustments to it. The second tip I want to show you is that you can extract a formula or part of a formula as a component formula and then reuse it multiple places in that component. So if we, for example, take our list item repeat formula here, and I'm just going to expand that a bit. First of all, let's just switch this back to OR, because I think that makes a bit more sense for our search formula. But this formula is getting rather big, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. And sort of sometimes you have to go and read all the bits again to understand how it actually works. So what we can do is we can sort of take all this filtering logic that takes up a lot of space, and we can extract that by cutting it out. And then I can give that a name here as a component formula. I'm going to call this matches search. And I'm going to add a couple of inputs of first name, name, and last name here. And we'll just give it some test values. So we have something to look at while we're building our formula. And in here, I'm just going to paste this. And of course, now this item, it doesn't understand what that is anymore, because that doesn't exist in this context. So we'll just change it to the input of first name and the input of last name we just defined. So now we've actually created a custom formula node with inputs again, some 0 more inputs, the first name and last name, and it produces an output. And we can now go into our repeat formula and actually add this matches search. Let's just expand this. And we can see, if we scroll down a bit, we can see it comes up here under component formulas. And component formulas works just like any other formula. It takes some inputs, and we're going to give it item first name and item last name. And so now we've sort of moved some of our logic out by giving it a new name, matches search. And it sort of makes this formula a lot simpler to work with. Most of the time when we're adjusting things, we might not really care what exactly goes into how we match the search. We might be looking at something else. So it's just a way to sort of organize your components, organize your formulas in a way that makes them much easier and faster to work with. And we can see our functionality stays the same. Thank you so much for watching this video on how to use formulas in Toddle. If there's still things you're unsure about, that's perfectly normal. The best way to learn how to build with Toddle is to do it. So spin up a new project, go and play around with lists and objects, and you can always come back to this video if there's something you want to watch again. We've got more great content coming up. I'm going to start building some projects with Toddle and different kind of backends like Sano and Superbase and all kinds of different things. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to build in Toddle. Thank you very much.